We have an exciting partnership to announce before we get into today's Scuttlebutt. Scuttlebutt has been asked to join Reads Across America Radio, a 24/7 internet radio station where you can listen to veteran stories 24/7. You can find that on the iHeartRadio app. You can also find it on their website, readsacrossamerica.org. The Scuttlebutt will be featured Friday nights at 9 p.m. and Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. If you don't know anything about Reads Across America, they're an incredible organization, all dedicated to honoring veterans and those who gave all in service to our country. Check out the Scuttlebutt on their radio station and all the other programs that they have on their 24/7 radio station, again, on iHeartRadio app or readsacrossamerica.org. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of The Scuttlebutt. I'm your host, Sean Hall, Director of Programming with the Veterans Breakfast Club. We're a nonprofit in Western PA whose mission is to create communities of listening around veterans and their stories to connect, educate, heal, and inspire. You can find out everything there is to know about the Veterans Breakfast Club on our website at www.veteransbreakfastclub.org. Today's episode of The Scuttlebutt focuses in on coffee in the military. We have joining us Donn Nemchick, who is a Navy veteran of the Vietnam era. He talks about what was so important about coffee in the Navy. We get into a bit of coffee in the history of the military. And then joining us later on in the program is Milo Speranzo. He is the owner of Vault Coffeehouse here in the Western PA region. He is also a veteran of the Air Force. So we get into his history of service as well as his passions of coffee. But we don't stop there with just coffee talk. We actually get into veteran-owned businesses. And there's a lot of good information that we have later on in the episode about being a veteran and opening a business. Was totally by surprise. I think we found a nice rabbit hole and got some great information out there for you, our viewers. Please like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell on YouTube so you're the first to know whenever we release new episodes. And it's always nice to hear from you, our audience. You can email me, Sean, SHAUN, at veteransbreakfastclub.org with any thoughts, questions, or comments. Or if you have any ideas for future Scuttlebutts, I'm happy to hear them. Thank you so much for supporting the podcast and enjoy the show. Joining me today for I would say a fairly large conversation, given the subject matter, is Donn Nemchick. Donn, you've been a part of the Scuttlebutt a couple times, though I want you to introduce yourself. Today, we're here to talk about coffee in the military, which I love coffee, so I'm excited to hear more about the history of coffee in the military. Donn, welcome back to the program.
Well, thank you, Sean. I'm glad to be here, of course. And for those of you who haven't seen me on the podcast before, I'm a U.S. Navy veteran, 1970, 1974. I was a communicator in various communication stations in Southeast Asia, and I served, my last command was the USS Constellation, an attack aircraft carrier, through the last combat air operations in 1973, and something that we're proud of, the fact that USS Constellation was the first carrier in 1965 to fly air ops out, and we were the last carrier in 1973 to wrap up things in the Gulf of Tonkin.
Donn, we've talked about coffee a bit before, about coffee in the military. Like I said, you wouldn't think that this would be as far-reaching of a conversation as it is. But coffee is probably your most prized possession in the Navy, it seems. As you've mentioned, that coffee is probably your highest bartering tool in the Navy.
Yes, it is, Sean. And coffee is the lifeblood of the Navy. With a reported over 58,000 pounds consumed every day. And just to put that in perspective, the recipe for Navy coffee is 1 pound of coffee is 1 gallon of coffee liquid. So it's something that in the Navy, it's the lifeblood of the Navy. We certainly, there's a good cartoon. We certainly use that because you have to remember, in the Navy, you're at sea, you're standing long hours on watch, spending a lot of time more awake than you do sleep, and certainly the coffee kept you alert, and the buzz was there from the caffeine. So it's an old saying that the Navy is operated on fuel oil. The Navy ships are driven by fuel oil, and the sailors are operated by coffee. And I can attest to that as a sailor who had been at sea, and I'll tell you, we just couldn't wait to grab a cup of coffee the first thing in the morning.
Well, what I brought up for our listeners on the podcast side is there's a great, I don't even know if this is a Far Side, but you can imagine Far Side comic where a gentleman is scooping with like a shovel a huge amount of coffee into the coffee maker, and there's a guy there. He says, "Where did I learn to make coffee?" Navy. Why? So I mean, do you have things in the Navy like creamer and your flavors and half and sugar and all those things, or does everybody just drink it black?
Everybody just drinks it black, and the reason being, of course, I'm dating myself back to 1973 type of thing. And I'm sure things have changed because actually they had some of the larger ships had actual Starbucks on their ship. They had the coffee Starbucks brand and the accoutrements that go with it, the creamers and things like that. But back in the day, number one, you don't have a lot of space for those types of things. You don't have the refrigeration. You don't have the ability to have the cleanup and such. But it was just black coffee. It was the easiest thing to do. And what's interesting, Sean, even the need for coffee is so dramatic that being on a carrier, there were sailors that worked on the flight deck, the most dangerous job in the Navy. You got jets flying, you got just a lot of hazards that could be up there. So they're not they have to use their hands. They can't walk around with a coffee mug. A lot of the sailors will get a pinch of ground coffee, put it in between their cheek and gum, and that was their coffee fix for that morning until they were able to go downstairs to the galley and
like tobacco chew. They put it in.
It was like chewing snuff in between.
Would that destroy your teeth and gums like tobacco does, or is it just like a nice pick me up?
Well, it was yes to both. It would destroy your teeth, but it was the quick pick me up. And I don't think when you're 19 and 20, or even 18, 19, and 20, you're overly concerned about the impact of things
on your teeth, right?
Later in life, you worry about it, but then you do not. But it was just interesting to the point where, Sean, they used to use the nickname for a cup of coffee. Let's go get a cup of Joe. Cup of Joe. What the heck does that mean? Where did that term come from? Well, what happened was there was a Secretary of the Navy that his name was Joseph Daniels, and he was a teetotaler. So the Navy back in the early 1900s and such, they had a ration of rum, and the officers had wine in their wardrooms where they were served their meals. So when the Secretary of the Navy found out about that, learned that there was drunkenness on vessels, and he immediately decried an order that there'll be no longer alcohol served on Navy ships, and it's just going to be coffee or tea. Well, no sailors really drink tea back then, so they use that not so much as a complimentary term, but more as a derogatory term. Let's go get a cup of Joe instead of something else. So that's how that term originated, and I think that was just interesting if people do hear that, because you hear so many different nicknames for coffee, and a cup of Joe is something I've commonly heard back in the day. So his being disturbed by the drunkenness on the boat certainly came up with that term.
I wouldn't fashion myself as a coffee snob personally. My wife certainly likes the coffee from Whole Foods. It's tasty. When I didn't even drink coffee before I met her, and now I drink probably 2-3 cups a day. But I can tell the difference, I guess, between this is good tasting coffee, but also disclaimer, I do like my creamer. I'm a sugar type guy. I like sweet, so I don't really go for like black coffee. It's just a little too much for me. Mm-hmm. But I also don't usually go for like the Giant Eagle. For those of you listening outside of Pittsburgh, we have the Giant Eagle, which is like our oh God, how many other places are there?
Our Piggly Wiggly.
It's our Piggly Wiggly, yeah. It's our grocery store. So I wouldn't go for like the Giant Eagle brand coffee. It probably wouldn't taste good. But also, like, I wouldn't go for Maxwell House. I've tried it and I'm like, that just doesn't taste right. Or I can say, oh yeah, that tastes like it's burnt. What do you go for? What do you drink?
I'm old school, Sean. Maxwell House or Folgers, and I'll tell you why. Growing up in a city in southwestern Pennsylvania, steel town, my dad was a mill worker, and he worked shifts. And you can just smell and hear that. You can smell the coffee brewing, and you can hear it throughout the day. And there's always a coffee pot on the stove. And my dad would either come home from his shift or getting ready to go. He'd say, come on, sit down, have a cigarette and a cup of coffee with me, and we'll BS about the Pirates or something like that. It was something that stayed with me. And I was even a young lad. And I was always a coffee drinker, always drank it black. And when I transitioned into the service and stuff, it was just natural for me. It was like smoking cigarettes. It was just something that I did before. It was nothing unusual. So those are things that we remember back then. But I know that nowadays there's so many coffees out there from the Amazon jungles, roasted by pygmies and all this other stuff. I'm not with all that, man. I just need a cup of good black coffee that was fresh, and I'm good to go. But
Well,
What's interesting,
speaking specifically to like the coffee in the Navy, what was there a brand? Or was it just,
well, it's good that you asked that because the Navy actually coffee was so important. They had their own roasting plants on the east and the west coast during World War II. And
hmm,
during that period from 1942, Sean, to 1948, the Oakland, California plant blended 115 million pounds of coffee, packed them in 50-pound sacks, and shipped them out to the Pacific Fleet. So that's how important coffee was. They knew that they had to do their own coffee. And it was a wartime. And back in the day, when they had rationing during World War II, they asked people, just limit your coffee to 1 cup a day so the soldiers, the GIs, can have their coffee as well. So
that's
those
true.
times
I've seen a picture of that where, drink less so they have more.
drink less so they have more. That's the term. You're
Mhm.
absolutely right.
And I should say through VBC, we have a connection with Bamboo Bob. They produce Vietnamese coffee. They ship it out here to us in Pittsburgh, and we get a very small kickback from any bag that we sell of Bamboo Bob coffee. But to our listeners, check out Bamboo Bob coffee, not strictly because you can help support VBC and our mission, but it's a good cup of coffee. Would you agree, Donn? Have you tried coffees from around the world? Like Vietnamese coffee tastes different than American coffee and where the beans are grown.
I have. And not only coffee from around the world, in addition to that, we were in Paris in 2019, pre-COVID. We're on vacation. And the coffee in Paris was everywhere you go, because it's the water and the brand that they use, et cetera. It just didn't ring a bell to me. But I think with the Vietnamese coffee, because the French had such a influence in Vietnam in the late 40s, early 50s after World War II, there might be some connection with that because French coffee was renowned to be like the French think everything is French is good. So there might be some connection with that. But to answer your question, a lot of times it's the water that's being brewed or the method. They always have the French press where they're squeezing the coffee down, or they're not looking at, like I was familiar with having that metal coffee percolator on a gas stove, and it was percolating away, and it would brew a strong coffee, which is how we got used to it. But they came up with instant coffee, the Nescafe freeze dried coffees, and even the coffee looked like tea bags where it's portable. You could take them in your we used to do that when we traveled. I would take the Maxwell House tea bag type coffee and keep it with me in case I didn't like what was being offered at the hotels that we were at. I'd just fire up some water and use one of those. But yes, it's to each his own with the taste. But I think coffees around the world is so important, and I think it was important early on when the discoverers like Marco Polo and those guys are going to the Mid East and stuff. And Arabic coffee is one of the better coffees in the world, and I think that's where a lot of that came from. Because I remember some of the advertisements for like Maxwell House and those others on the old television commercials. We use smooth Arabic coffee and roasted Colombian coffee that was picked by Juan Valdez on his mule. So it's always there's some marketing to everything, but certainly coffees are a tradition around the world and a commodity, of course. And whenever you get that, particularly during 9/11, I mean not 9/11, but COVID. You get to COVID when they were saying there would be a coffee shortage because of the supply chain. And I know even myself, man, I ran down to Costco and got 2 big 5-pound cans of Folgers or something just to have some on hand. But yeah, coffee is just very important around the world. And I think the tradition of it is goes on. Look at the 1950s and such when the beatniks were getting popular. Where did they go? To the coffee house. What did they do at the coffee house? They exchanged information. They read their poetry. They became a different counterculture. So I think coffee plays a role even as it does today. Everybody likes to have that cup of coffee because I'll say, "Hey, come on over. Why don't you have a cup of coffee with me?" And sometimes that's a bonding mechanism.
Well, I was going to say, because it's kind of amazing to me that we've gotten this many scuttlebutts, over 100 now, without talking about military or coffee in the military. Mainly because if you look at our logo on your hat, on my shirt, it's a mug of steaming coffee. Because you'd think whenever we sit down at VBC and we share stories, you think about, I'm gonna have a cup of coffee and just sit down and tell a story. And just speaking to your point of just like connection, that's sort of what we've hung our hat on our logo is let's sit down, have a cup of coffee. Now, I bring up the logo specifically, not just because it has the coffee on it, but that's a very particular style of mug there, right?
Yes, yes, it is. And I know a lot of us. I like to the mug, not a cup where you put your two fingers in. I want a mug that I can grip on, and it has to be 10 or 16 ounces, and I use the same one all the time. And if you remember the old TV series Gunsmoke, they were always making coffee in the marshal's office. Chester was always asking Matt Dillon if he wanted another cup of coffee, and Doc would come in and bum a cup of coffee from them. And it was even when they were out in their campfires, they were out on a range and they had their campfire going. Somebody was making a cup of coffee, and a range rider would come in and say, "Boy, I could smell that coffee. You mind if I come down and sit down and have a cup with you?" So I just think coffee just played such a role in American history, and I think history of the world. It was a trading commodity.
Going to your point also about like the taste of the coffee, we at VBC, we had an MRE tasting event a couple years ago during COVID. We said, let's all get together on Zoom. Everybody can order their own MRE and we can all sit down and open up together and we can all talk about the MRE and just eating what is in there and does it taste good. As you know, as a civilian myself, I loved it. I did not expect the coffee in the MRE to be as good as it was.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the suppliers knew that they had to come up with something that was going to be accepted by the troops, because if you get a negative report, particularly with government contracting, and you get a negative report, they may pull that contract from you, and that contract's typically lucrative. Mm-hmm. And just touching base on that, for veteran-owned businesses that are looking to get in the government contracting arena. This is a little bit off topic about coffee, but in essence, if you're a veteran-owned business and you're looking into doing business with the government, and you have to remember the government sets aside specifically 3% of its contracts for veteran-owned businesses, particularly service-connected disabled-owned businesses. One would say, how do I get my coffee business and provide all the coffee to the naval bases on the East Coast? Well, there's a procurement process. It's laborious and you have to get through some red tape. But if you're a veteran-owned business and or interested in becoming a veteran-owned business, you can clearly go into the Small Business Administration's website. That would be sba.gov. They have a tutorial. They have a ton of information on how to get certified as a veteran-owned business. You can self-certify as a veteran-owned business by just putting on your door that I'm a veteran-owned business and come on in. And that's fine. If you're not going to do business with the government, no harm, no foul. But if you want to get into the big arena of government contracting, for example, if you're a window washer and you want to wash all the windows in every federal building in the country, then that contract might be set aside for service-connected disabled veterans. The Small Business Administration can help you with that. There is also another organization that can help you with the certification process called NAVOBA, National Association of Veteran-Owned Businesses. They are very well versed. They've been around a long time. There is a process for it, but it's worthwhile because once you get into that government contracting arena, they will actually send you notifications when there is an appropriate contract that's being offered. For example, all the window washers contracts in the country are being set out on July 1st, and here they are. And here's how you do your request for proposals and such like that. It is very lucrative. You can get jammed up if you're not a veteran-owned business, but you're proclaiming that you are. And that's why they do the certification process, because there have been fraud and abuse like there is with anything in government contracting or business itself. But they tried to temper that by doing a certification process. It's not that daunting. It can get tied up, but if you follow the steps that the Small Business Administration and National Association of Veteran-Owned Businesses follow, you're good to go. What's interesting, the NAVOBA, the Veteran-Owned Business Association, even coined a phrase, Sean, and instead of entrepreneur, they call it vetrepreneur. And how important that is, because veterans make good small business owners for a couple of reasons, several of which is we're trained very early on: teamwork, improvise, adapt, overcome. That's all the qualities of a small business person right there. So veterans have that opportunity, and going into the coffee business and such, you just never know. You can provide services to different military installations and such, and that's where they're going right now. Mostly everything's contracted now into the civilian service. There's no more KP or kitchen duty and things like that in the service. They have food services, and I even mentioned, I think, some of the larger ships back recently have some Starbucks on board and some others that are starting to contract with them. Now, it'd be interesting. They have Navy personnel working at a Starbucks facility, but it would just be interesting. The military personnel didn't want to give up that touch of home. Okay, instead of just getting the old Navy coffee with that guy shoveling it in with his cigarette ash falling into it and such, they wanted something more that brings them to the feelings of home. So that's just a little sidelight to the coffee conversation that we're having about touching base with those interested. And just again, anyone interested in some more of that and they can't get what they're looking for on the website, they can contact me. I can leave my contact information, but they can contact me through VBC, of course. And if they have some specific questions, I'd be happy to answer them for them and try to point them in the right direction.
Great points, Donn. And speaking of veteran business owners, joining us now is Milo Speranzo. Milo, you are the owner of the Vault Coffeehouse here in Pittsburgh, the Pittsburgh region. We're going to get into more of the coffee talk with you specifically, because I imagine that you're more of a coffee aficionado. You like a good cup of joe, as we were mentioning earlier. But Milo, welcome to the Scuttlebutt. Thank you so much for joining us. I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and it's great to meet you, Sean and Donn. We may have passed or crossed paths years ago as I started a veteran-owned business right after my time in the service. So I spent I was 12 years in the Air Force. We had a tour over to Afghanistan where we had a couple hard landings, and we came back. They gave us all they ran us through line of duty determinations, and they found some fractured vertebrae in my neck and a couple other ailments. And they said, we can't keep you qualified for flying status. And I panicked. I had, my skills weren't necessarily transferable. After that, it doesn't transfer to private sector. And then they offered me a really lame, no offense to anybody, but it was a desk job. And I said, all right, I think this is a good transition point for me. Mm-hmm. So at that point, I processed out of the Air Force and started a very, very small consulting company. I was command and control in the Air Force, so I worked a lot with the intel agencies, and it was right when, unlucky for the United States, but lucky for me at the time, it was right when Edward Snowden and Bradley Manning and those situations were occurring, and the IT contractors were under heavy, heavy scrutiny. So I started, like I said, a very small consulting firm, myself, two other former military command and control officers, and we went into integrators that had classified IT contracts, and we helped them secure their processes. Mm-hmm. And that, luckily enough, grew very, very quickly. It caught on. We were working for a small company here in Pittsburgh. The company's name was Pepperweed, and they were an HP subsidiary. So we got known by HP, and then HP really sold our message for us. They did some great marketing for us, and companies like Tech Data and Avnet in the electronic distribution space that had IT contracts in the green zone or wherever it was at the time. Mm-hmm. Reached out. We ended up with about 18 consultants at the end of the day, and we rolled my first veteran-owned company under Pepperweed, and it was acquired by the distributor Avnet at the time. Mm-hmm. So I had a really great experience with Donn's team at the Small Business Administration, and there was a lot of consulting that's available to veteran business owners that they might not necessarily know is there. And I'm pretty lucky, honestly. We had a great liaison at the 911th Airlift Wing here in Pittsburgh, and they said, "No, go call Donn and team, and they'll help." So that was a very successful first run. Since then, I have since worked for Dell Technology, stayed in the IT field, and this is my first foray back into business ownership. It's been about 8 years, and it is my outside of foreign affairs, military, U.S. government, coffee, I think is my biggest passion. So it was a no-brainer. I wanted to help the town I grew up in. It's an amazing town here on the eastern side of Pittsburgh, Pitcairn, PA. And there was a bank that said it's an amazing building that's solid bones. And I said, well, how do I do that? How do I make a coffee shop out of this bank? And it was another one that just kind of fell into, but we created the Vault Coffeehouse. So Vault, like the bank, we left the vault in there. We got some amazing Instagram opportunities with the old vault. I think it's up on the screen now. And then also we have some amazing coffee. So this is my second run at veteran business ownership. I am just so overwhelmed by the support of the veteran community so far. We've been open 9 weeks, and we've had vets come in from literally, I know sounds kind of maybe unbelievable, but a couple 100 miles away to have coffee in the shop. So, we have folks from Erie, PA, from Ohio, from West Virginia, from Virginia, and they saw our story on local news or via print, and they made a purposed trip in to Western PA, and part of their trip was to come to the coffee shop. Then they went to Pittsburgh and explored, and then stopped at the coffee shop on their way out. So the support has been absolutely amazing, and I can't be more grateful for what we've seen, already.
Well, we're certainly happy to highlight Vault Coffeehouse here on the Scuttlebutt, and I'm hoping that we can help spread the word of the good word of what you guys are doing. I have to ask though, there's a couple. I have a bunch of questions for you.
Shoot. Go.
First one specifically is that Donn made mention of how important coffee was in the Navy. Was it as important, do you think, in the Air Force?
Oh God, yeah, absolutely, yeah, and it's we saw Donn mentioned a little bit of a barter system that they had in the Navy. The Air Force had that as well. However, we have for everybody listening, you're probably very familiar with all the acronyms, but our AFSC or MOS, my side of the house in command and control, we used coffee as an excuse all the time, and it was the best excuse. We would use it to go to the break room or wherever the coffee was located, and essentially, we'd time it appropriately. So the folks that we knew in logistics or aircraft maintenance or the air crews, we knew they'd be there at the same time, and we wanted an excuse just to catch up, see what was going on out in the field. What did you see that night before? And then, what are your parents saying? What's your family saying about what's going on at home? And you keep in touch. So we used coffee very, very much as an excuse to connect with the folks that were deployed with us. When we were home, at whatever base we were at, not deployed, we used it as an excuse to talk about non-deployment things, the state of the country, whatever, random, anything we wanted to talk about, cars. But it was definitely a communications highway. Coffee was like the communication highway inside of the Air Force that I knew. It was always that excuse to go and connect with folks you were deployed or stationed with, and we had a lot of excuses. Hey, you got to go 15. We're gonna go. So it's amazing, and I think I think coffee has the long standing, even in the private sector. I see that in the coffee shop now. It's very much an excuse. It's an excuse for people that have their in-laws in, and their mother-in-law might just maybe be putting them over the edge, and that's an excuse. Hey, I gotta go get a coffee, and we see them come into the coffee shop. It's an excuse to come down and be with other people. The coffee shop always has 10 people. If you just want to be around somebody. So in the Air Force, we saw it as a great excuse. And in the private sector, I'm seeing the same thing. It's really one of the best excuses you can have to go and do something.
We make we made the correlation here earlier about the VBC logo and the coffee mug, and that we've had that logo forever, and that the mug here was specifically chosen as sort of a Navy mug of, but it's also that idea of getting together, sitting down, sharing, having a conversation, sharing a story. It's somewhat like what we hang our hat on here at VBC. I love like coffee and a chess match, or I would also say like a whiskey and a chess match. But I enjoy coffee, sitting down, having my cup of coffee in the morning, playing a game of chess, just sort of like gets your mind working. It gets you moving, it tastes good. Milo, you had a history in veteran-owned business, but you said your passion now is coffee. How did that sort of come to be? And when you started thinking, I'm going to create a coffee house, like where was the genesis of that?
Yeah, pretty. It's. I'd say this is my maybe most interesting Air Force story. I absolutely hated coffee, and I thought it was bitter. And I was 18 at the time, and all the senior master sergeants were just. I mean, they'd wake up in the middle of the night in the tent and just pour a cup of coffee and go back to sleep. I mean, it just baffled my mind why coffee was such. It was so integrated into the fabric of not the military, but these human beings. And I was lucky enough early on, well before 9/11, 95, 96, to our main focus was South America. So we did a lot of, drug interdiction or intel flights down there in South America. We got to spend a lot of time in Colombia. And near a couple of our stops in Colombia, near Medellin and Cartagena, we had the opportunity to go to these little houses that were, shops/houses. And we would go over there for coffee in the mornings. And of course, I'm going to follow the senior NCOs wherever they go, because I don't want to screw anything up. So, I go over with them. And I don't know if it was the actual taste of the coffee was so amazing, or if it was just the romanticness of it, if that's a word. It was, you walked into a little house that smelled like coffee on the stove. They're literally, they pick the beans, they've roasted them there, they're grinding them, they're serving you this coffee. From then on, it became really a bit of a compulsion. So I fell in love with coffee in Colombia after not being a big coffee fan. And then it just kind of spiraled from there. So I was 19 or 20 at the time. By the time I was 23 or 24, any deployment we had in South America, if it was Honduras, and we didn't have really like the Google, and we certainly didn't have camera phones or anything like that back in the late 90s, or they were just coming around. So it was some pretty labor intensive calling people and saying, hey, when you were in Honduras, was there good coffee? I'm flying into Soto Cana. What do you got? And so I would do some intel prior to deployments to figure out where the best coffee was. And I was lucky enough to go to some really good coffee hotspots in South America, Latin America, Central America, prior to 9/11, where our area responsibility was shifted from South America to the Middle East. So I feel like I got the Air Force paid for an amazing, master's level education in coffee in my early years, and that has just continued.
Donn?
Milo, just curious, how's business for you? That's what I always used to ask my entrepreneur. Yeah. How's business, and how can you improve it going forward?
Oh, so there's that. So I came into the world of coffee loving and having a pretty wide knowledge base of the actual product. I've learned a lot. So I knew who in town, in my opinion, roasted the best coffee and who I was going to use as a vendor. I also knew the township that I was in. I know the mayor very well, and the councilman. That was the easy part for me. There is a massive list of things I can do better, because frankly, I just don't know how to be a coffee shop owner. It's very different from from running a professional services consulting, niche company. It is very much, food service and inspections and retail and scheduling and inventory management. And and I am not good at any of that in the first 9 weeks. I see those are my biggest areas of my biggest opportunities, to put it nicely. Mm-hmm. That being said, business has buoyed all of my mistakes. So, we came out and we were lucky enough. We were featured on KDKA and WTAE early on. And the fact that it was a veteran-owned business was one thing. It was one, to help the community that I grew up in, that raised a lot of us that came from, maybe one-parent homes or raised by our grandparents. So Pitcairn's an amazing place, and we're trying to help it and get it back on its feet. And then on the other side, the other highlight was it was veteran-owned. Those two stories really resonated. So we came in just almost running from a business perspective. We're averaging about 120 customers or so a day in the coffee shop. Our average ticket, people are buying more than they typically would at a coffee shop. A lot of it, those upsells are because they're veterans that come in to support other veterans.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of my mismanagement of this business early on has been buoyed a bit by how great the support is of the veteran community and the non-veteran community that want to support veterans, to be honest, which is massive.
Well, Milo, that's interesting because Sean and I, we've done several podcasts together, and I've been part of the Veterans Breakfast Club for several years now. They've been around for 15 years, and it's just an amazing organization. And our magazine reaches out to 15,000 readers every quarter, so it's a great opportunity.
Amazing.
But just for sometimes when you're at that obstacle right now, or if you're about to be there about marketing or inventory control, there's a great resource at the University of Pittsburgh. It's called the Small Business Development Center, and at no cost to you, okay, they will counsel you. And these aren't just college students going for their papers or something like that. These are professionals in small business. I could share the number with you if you like.
Oh, I would love that. I would love it. I think I need it. I think that would be
it would be a
great.
Yeah, their number is 412-648-1544. That is 412-648-1544. You could just Google the University of Pittsburgh Small Business Development Center. Their director, Ray Vargo, is excellent. He has a staff of people who are familiar with marketing. They will help they will do some research for you. They do a lot of the, we'll just say, grunt work that perhaps you're overlooking because you're running a business. And given that, it's a great opportunity for you, not only that, but to find out what other small businesses, trust me, they've done other coffee shops. And they say, here's why this coffee shop didn't make it. They didn't know how to order their supplies on a first in, last out basis or whatever. And they can maybe help you get over a pitfall or two in Pitcairn, not to play on words, but a pitfall or two that perhaps you weren't thinking of. So again, the Small Business Development Center at the University of Pittsburgh. It's also called the Center for Entrepreneurial Excellence. And that rings true, man. It really does. But when I was with the Small Business Administration, I retired in 2005. And afterwards, I did some private consulting with the University of Pittsburgh because, Milo, they needed a veteran to do veteran-related programs, okay? And there I was. So it was enjoyable to me because, number one, veterans are my passion. And small businesses coincided with that because oftentimes veterans would come back and say, they were working with the VA Center of Occupational Therapy, and the people at the VA were good at occupational therapy, but they weren't business people. So they would send them over to me, Milo, and say, Donn, take a look at this guy's plan and see what you think. And I didn't want that business to come in and say, just because I'm getting money from the VA and I have other resources, I'm going to open up my pizza shop on the corner because my grandmother made the best pizza and I know I'm going to sell thousands of them. Well, that's not how it works. Right. And I probably dissuaded more veterans in a nice way than I did have veterans open their businesses because they just weren't ready or their plan was not in place. And I would try to steer them to the many resources: University of Pittsburgh, Small Business Development Center, Novova, Small Business Administration, any of those resources that are available to them basically at no cost or very minimal cost. And you got the expertise of consultants that are experienced in small businesses, and they were just a big help. And again, take my suggestion, if you will, give them a call and they'll arrange something with you. And what do you got to lose?
No, I absolutely, I love it. I mean, I think one, I need help with the blocking and tackling, like you mentioned, a lot of that inventory management, things that I'm not aware of, but then, there's some big rocks too, that I think they'll be able to help with. When I certified my first business as a service disabled veteran-owned small business, it was essentially a self-certification. It was an easy certification. Yeah. I have heard now that is not the case. There is a lengthy certification process, and I want to do that because as I scale, I would like to provide, the Vault roasted coffee, veteran-owned coffee to, maybe some of the governmental agencies, or wholesale it, or deliver it to, the VAs, whatever that might entail. Having that certification was a great thing for me in the past. I want to do that again. So
that's where
I do need that help.
That's where Milo Novova can help you. Novova.org, Navoba.org. follow their links. They'll put you in that right area to help you with that certification. You are right about the daunting task of getting it as a service-connected disabled veteran. You want to get into that arena because your NACIS code, okay, your business, it's like your MOS. Your NACIS code will drive different marketing opportunities for you through the government agency. They will literally send to you any food service contracts that are out there, right? I don't even know if they nail it down specifically to coffee, but any food service or procurement. And that saves you all the time. First thing in the morning, you open up your laptop and here's 3 opportunities for you.
Yep. Yeah.
And so it's worth the time and the effort. And there is help for you to do that through Novoba and, of course, the Small Business Development Center at the University of Pittsburgh. They're excellent.
That's great. Can't wait to talk to them. Thank you.
You know, what's interesting is I really thought this would just be a conversation about coffee, but I think our listeners are getting a master class on becoming a venturepreneur, which is pretty awesome here. I want to loop back, Milo, here to the idea of what do you think, what skills did you develop while in the military that are helping you now as a business owner? Because I feel like veterans are uniquely positioned to be very successful business owners.
I cannot agree more. I mean, I think the two that have stood out, not just in my time as an entrepreneur, but also in working in the private sector, the two that I've seen that it's going to sound like I have a bit of an ego here. I don't. This is what I see in all veterans. And there's a lot of veterans on my team currently at Dell. We're in the marketing organization and we focus on marketing in the public sector. So we have vets on the team. But I think what's really carried through and what you can see is, one, attention to detail. There is an inherent attention to detail that all veterans have through their, training and get just their, through osmosis of being in the military, that you can't teach in a college, that you really just don't see out there in the workforce. Now that lends itself to entrepreneurship and, making sure you're dotting your I's, crossing your T's from a business perspective, but it also in the private sector, just working for any of these big, Dells of the world or big IT companies, any company, that attention to detail that a vet brings is something that is a differentiator. On the second,
if I may interrupt, isn't that the worst part of basic training?
The worst.
That's the worst part. I say, why does he make me tie my shoes right over left like that every flipping time? Or why is he keeping the dust out of that corner? Well, let me tell you, on a ship, that dust is tinder. And what's the worst thing that you see on a ship is fire. So, sailor, if you're not cleaning that corner and getting that dust out of that corner, that's tinder. And if there's a fire, it could start right there.
Yeah.
In basic training, when they just put that hospital fold on the sheets and those things, it sounds like it's harassment or it's being over the top. There's a reason for that. And you're absolutely right. It's the attention to detail. It's the timing of things. If your meeting was 0800 and you were there at 0815, you're late, buddy. Okay, why were you late? Okay, you held us back for 15 more minutes. And so you start to determine within your mindset, I have to be on time for things. I have to do things the right way because there's a reason for everything. And especially business. I mean,
and it totally translates right into coffee, not to drag us back into the wonderful world of coffee, but there are a lot of intricacies that really set the different brands, the different roasters apart. And, there's the flavor palette, of course, and everybody's familiar with like light roast and medium roast and dark roast, but there are a lot of, if you want to source your own green coffee, there's a lot of detail you got to look at. If you're picking a roaster, which there's, multiple out there, how they do it, their processes, everywhere that I've engaged outside of the military, that attention to detail seems to be one of all the veterans that I work with. They're really very marketable traits is the attention to detail. The other one I think is leadership. I mean, it was, early on in, I don't know. I mean, I can't even guess. I'm guessing the years. So, late 90s or so, you're early 20s and in charge of something at a very young age that was, and this is not me talking down to the corporate world, but in charge of something that, that had a human life in its, in its grasp, or something extremely important to not just myself and the company, but maybe a country, i.e. like Colombia, when we're in Colombia and we're helping them identify whatever it is, drug trafficking or the FARC at the time, and that, government infiltration. It is, you get into entrepreneurship and, or just working with, a company in the private sector, you really very quickly are seen as the calm in the storm. And it's very natural. I've been in tens and tens of meetings, over 100 meetings where we were being grilled by a potential customer that was a 6-figure customer. And, I got me and 2 colleagues with me, and it just, you just naturally remain calm. You compartmentalize, you prioritize talking points, and in leaving those meetings or engagements, it's, wow, how do you stay so calm through this? How did you remember to bring that up? And it's like, well, I did this before in the military, and I did it on the backs of maybe somebody being killed. This, it's $1 million deal to sell this server hardware or storage hardware. It doesn't resonate. I don't have that. I don't feel that urgency and that panic that you might feel, because we've already done it in other ways that had, I don't want to say more meaningful consequences, but in real life,
certainly higher
more meaningful.
stakes.
Yes, higher stakes.
If lives are on the line,
sure.
I mean, that's different. And yet, and I can hear your point of just like, this doesn't belittle the stakes that they're dealing with, but at a young age, like you said, working with the stakes of potentially lives on the line, you learn calm in those moments.
You do.
If I can interject, Sean, I was watching an interview called Veterans Voices on Pennsylvania Cable Network, and they had a Vietnam veteran who, once he left the service, he became a very high official in tennis. He was went to Wimbledon, and he went to all these major events, major champion things with tennis. Okay, and he became like the top of the line official. So one time he was asked, I guess a guy McEnroe had a tendency to be disruptive and argumentative with the officials and things like that. He said, "How did you put up with McEnroe? What? He was so argumentative as an official. How did you put up with it?" He says, "Look, he was in Vietnam for a year, his infantry." He says, "I was being shot at for a year. Whatever this guy says means nothing to me." That's absolutely punctuates your calm. The fact that, look, I've been through worse than this. Okay, I can compartmentalize. I can adapt to this. I can accept this because technically I've been through worse. My experience has seasoned me as a business owner. Coming into it, you've been seasoned already. Number one, through the military, and number two, through private sector. So that's why I think this session today, even though we're off subject a little bit about veteran stories, but this veteran has a story as well. And this story tells how veterans have that training that comes with being in the military at whatever level. At some point, Donn, you're going to be in charge of something, okay? And you're going to learn to take command of it, take charge of it, and hopefully do a good job. Because again, there's probably that guy to the left of you and to the right of you. His well-being is depending upon your competence.
Yeah, and it's very much, you may feel like it's almost second nature as a veteran when you come out that you do these things. It really isn't. It is something that inherently is different than a lot of the workforce that's out there. And when they see that, it lends itself to leadership too. So you have that attention to detail. You have that, that calm demeanor. What that does is people notice. People notice other business owner, if it's entrepreneurial or if it's in the work environment, they notice and they brand you through that as a leader. And they will elevate you based off of these, this ability to do these specific things that you learned as a veteran. And it really lends itself to making veterans very, very, not just because we've led people maybe in battle or to, through different military tasks, but just in general, the personality traits that you have make you a very, very natural leader, whether you're starting a coffee shop or you're working in a specialty field inside of technology. It definitely pays dividends for sure.
So I want to loop back with our couple minutes left here, back to coffee and Milo. I was saying before is that, my wife kind of likes the Whole Foods like brand. We just bring that in. We have a percolator. We like a good cup of coffee. Donn, to each his own. He just says Maxwell or Folgers. Give me that. I'm fine with that.
Understood.
I can't do like black coffee. I like having some creamer in it. But, as an owner of a coffee house, I assume that you have tried many different kinds of coffee. And I'm interested in sort of like your taste buds.
Yeah.
I've never said that to anybody before.
No.
I'm interested in sort of like, what do you look for? You go to a coffee shop, you take a sip, what is it about you that you're like, hey, that's a good cup of coffee?
Yeah, no, and I think I think so. There's no wrong answer to this one. There are things that you can do wrong to coffee where it's going to taste bad to everybody. If you burn a pot of Maxwell House, you're going to taste that it's burnt and very tannic. If you burn specialty coffee that costs 10 times the amount of a Maxwell House, it's going to taste burnt. So that preparation is really key. The preparation of the actual bean, the machine you use. So if you got Maxwell House and a really good machine, you got it dialed in, you'll have acceptable coffee. Absolutely
acceptable, at least
acceptable. Yes.
One of the things that I would look for in that first cup of coffee, it has to be hot.
Yes.
If it's sitting out for a long period, it starts to become tepid, then it loses a lot, Milo. I think you'll know more about that than I.
So
I can right away.
hot. Yeah, no, you're right. Temperature is key. So I look for, even at the specialty coffee shops, the heat, and it's for two different reasons. One, it's how long it sat, but two, the brew temp for a really good specialty coffee is really high. You shouldn't be able to, if they're brewing a Colombian blend in a specialty shop, you should not be able to just chug it. It should be extremely hot, because you got to brew them to pull out all the flavor notes. If you really, you see on the packages, raspberry, chocolate, all these flavor notes. If it's not brewed at 185, 190 degrees, you're not going to get those flavor notes. And it's just going to be, you'll get the caffeine and you'll get the coffee. But so I do look for temp in a couple, for two different reasons. I look for it based off of, did they actually pull what this bean has to offer into the cup? And has it been sitting is the other side.
Milo, that begs the question, what about the popularity now of iced coffee? I've never had iced coffee.
Yeah, well, so there's some you got two different types of iced coffee. So you got iced coffee, and that's just your brew. You brew that sucker real hot, you put it in the fridge, you save the pot, you pour it over ice later. It should maintain most of the flavor notes and most of the goodness of that bean. But now you have cold brew. Cold brew is a different beast. You want to select the right blend for a cold brew, typically a darker blend, and you want to pull the right flavor notes that can be pulled out of a bean during a cold brew process. Cold brew process is, you take a lot of beans, grind them, put them in a very special container for cold brew, get some purified cold water, and you let it sit for 24, 36 hours until it brews. And it'll pull nuance from that dark bean that you can't get in iced coffee. So it's that next tier of an iced coffee. If you really want to taste the coffee and the flavor notes, the cold brew, it's going to be a little stronger. It's going to be excellent. That's like your high test. So that, you're right. That has been hot, especially as the weather gets warmer. That's everybody's asking us, what cold brew do you got today? What do you got brewed up? Is it, is it a Colombian? Is it an Ethiopian? Is it a Honduran? Whatever it is. But you're right. It is popular for sure.
What do you say that Vault Coffeehouse hangs its hat on? Obviously, I'm sure you go in there, you get a really delicious cup of coffee, but what do you want your first customer to come in and really experience with that first cup of coffee? Yeah,
I mean, a couple things. So one, it's back to my kind of weird coffee story from the military, where I hated coffee until I tried this, what I thought was the greatest coffee that's ever existed. So before construction began on the space, I went to a great friend in town, TJ Fairchild, who owns all of the Commonplace coffees. And I asked him, I said, I want to replicate that taste. I've never been able to. So we sat there and I'm somebody that has given him $0. He's doing this for me because I'm a veteran. He's an amazing guy. He wants to help me build a business. This wasn't, I'm going to guarantee I buy X amount of coffee from you, or I'm this big vendor. He rolled out the red carpet. We pulled in beans from everywhere in the world. We honed it into, Latin America for the flavor notes. And then we did blends after blends, maybe 20 or 30 different blends. And we finally got to where this coffee literally tastes just like the coffee. We've recreated it like it did in Colombia at that little house in the middle of the forest. So when you come in, our house roast is that roast. Commonplace makes it for us. They roast it for us specialty. We got there, you'll see the name, the Vault blend on the logo. And that's something I'm really, really proud of. We also took that same level of, that same attention to detail with the rest of our beans, our espresso blends and everything else. So you're going to get an amazing whatever you want. If it's a latte, a cappuccino, a cortado, Americano, whatever it is, you're going to get a perfectly brewed the veteran attention to detail in the brew process, along with some very, very maniacally sourced beans. You'll get that. And then the second thing that I really want everybody to know from a coffee perspective is, coffee and community have always went hand in hand. It is rare these days that you see a Starbucks where you can fit more than 6 people. They're tiny. It's a business, and I love what they do too. There's a lot that you can learn from these big companies, and they have a drive-through. They want a customer every 30 seconds. That's the goal there. That's not the goal of the Vault. It's not the goal of a lot of the specialty shops around the world, and certainly in Pittsburgh. It's to create an atmosphere of community, to have a local jazz artist, to have people come in and be able to interact. And we've seen that already. We've seen people that have lived 2 streets apart in Pitcairn that have never had the chance to meet, that within the first week of the coffee shop, you live on 3rd Street? I'm literally 1 block up. What do you mean your kid plays the saxophone? Mine does. So in seeing that and fostering that more than you would ever see at, a Dunkin' Donuts, where the booths are just, 2 booths facing each other. That's for 4 vets to come in, get some Dunkin' coffee and BS about whatever's going on in the day. That's not how we're set up. We're set up as in an open space. Everybody can see and talk to each other and engage. So great coffee, community on the back half are the two focal points for sure.
Milo, what's your address of your coffee shop?
550 Broadway Boulevard, Pitcairn, PA 15140. Right on the main drag as you come through Pitcairn. It's in the old. It doesn't look like a melon bank anymore because we've made it very modern and cool. But you can't miss it. We got a giant Vault Coffeehouse circle in the front, and we have a veteran wall as you come in too to take a look at, where the township has done a great job of highlighting World War I, World War II, Korean conflict, Vietnam. But the tablets in the town, the big memorial, stopped at Desert Storm. So we're taking it upon ourselves to do a bit of a tablet on the inside. So take a look at our local vets too when you come in. They're on the wall as soon as you walk in. All 5 branches are represented. But 550 Broadway, Pitcairn, PA.
So Pitcairn was your hometown?
It was. I grew up 1 street back. I lived there until I went to the military. So at 17, when I graduated high school, I signed up and then left. And then through military travels, I didn't get really a chance to be home for a good bit. But I maintained. My friends from Pitcairn remained my friends all the way through my military time. Now they're all. It's a group, and we all grew up in an abnormal way that we might have thought was normal. Of the 6 or 7 8 core friends that I had, only 1 actually had 2 parents. The other ones we were raised by our grandparents. Right? The community pitched in the 80s and the early 90s and raised a lot of us. And we're all, in our own way, school teachers, police officers, community. We've all served the community in our lives. Councilman, we have one who's, Wounded Warrior Project he works for. He loves it. His brother's a vet, and he's an amazing guy. But in that, this is just another way. The coffee shop's just another way to help the community, help bring more businesses in. And that's what we're seeing now. So it's been an amazing experiment, but also, selfishly, it's been very rewarding to continue that kind of philosophy and give back to the town a little bit.
Milo, you may have thought of this, but Flag Day is coming upon us next week.
I did.
14th. Wouldn't it be a good idea when a veteran comes in to hand him one of them little flags along with his cup of coffee and say, thank you for your service and God bless America?
Well, I didn't think of the little flag thing, but I was talking to the manager this morning and I said, Ivy, Flag Day's coming up. So far, it's been easy. Veterans Day, Memorial Day, we got the apple pie latte for Memorial, we have what do we do for Flag Day? So we bought some red, white, and blue sprinkles, and we were thinking about what to do next, but that's a great idea. On all of the veterans always get a discount no matter what. So at the coffee shop, vets always get 10% off everything when they come in, but then we always try to do something extra for those days. So I think that's a great idea. The little flags,
those little lapel pins that we all wear. The American.
Yes.
So you can never have enough of them.
Agreed. So I will incorporate one of those into the red, white, and blue sprinkles for Flag Day. I promise.
So before we kick off here, Milo, how can people support you other than coming into the coffee shop? Is there a website? Can I order a bag to be sent to me? How does it work? Yeah.
So one, yes, there is a website, www.coffeeinthevault.com. And we are standing up. We've been open now. This is our 10th week in operation. So we were kind of overwhelmed, to be honest, at the beginning. We had some online orders coming in and we had to shut it off just so we could focus on our customers at hand. So we're going to be turning that back on the first week of July, and you will be able to order the Vault blend, all the blends that we have specifically for the Vault online, and we'll ship those out to you free, of course. And we'll have a wider selection of merch and that starting in July. So right now, please go to the website, check out the menu. If you're in the area, please stop in. I'm there as much as I can be. So I love meeting everybody that comes in. And then in July, it's we're back to business as usual. We're going to have the Vault blend and mugs and shirts and everything else available via the website.
That's exciting. Donn, Milo, I want to thank you guys both for this conversation. Again, I thought it was going to be let's just chat about coffee in the military, but we got into so much more, which was so exciting. And I'm sure that our audience will appreciate this. And to our audience, like, share, subscribe, ring the bell on YouTube so you're the first to know whenever we release new episodes. You can always reach out to me, Sean, SHAUN, at veteransbreakfastclub.org with ideas for future episodes, just like Donn did. He said, hey, found out about this guy Milo and Vault Coffeehouse. Reach out, see if they want to do a podcast. Here we are. So I'd love to hear from our audience about future ideas or future scuttlebutts or opinions or thoughts on the current episode. Always a pleasure here with you, Donn. Thank you for joining me again. Milo, such a pleasure and an honor to have you a part of the podcast. I can't wait to stop into Vault Coffeehouse and have a cup of joe.
Love it. My pleasure as well. And thank you for everything you're doing. And thank you, Donn, as well. I'll talk to you soon.
You're welcome.
Thank you for watching this episode of The Scuttlebutt. I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Tobacco-Free Adagio Health. Tobacco-Free Adagio Health has been supporting the podcast for quite some time now. We've been so pleased to be supported by them. They are dedicated to reducing and preventing tobacco use and getting the word out about the hazards of smoking and secondhand smoke. They're all about health, so they want people to quit. They have classes, nicotine replacement therapy, and a popular quit line, 1-800-QUIT-NOW. They also educate people, children especially, about tobacco use from cigarettes, cigars, pipes, chew, snuff, and other nicotine products like vaping. And finally, Tobacco-Free Adagio Health advocates for public and private policies that ensure healthy places to live, work, and play. You can learn all about what Tobacco-Free Adagio Health offers at tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org, or you can check out the 2 Scuttlebutt episodes that featured Tobacco-Free Adagio Health. We had a wonderful representative come on to the podcast, talk to us about all the classes and therapies that they offer. It was 2 wonderful conversations, so I definitely direct you to both of those if you want more information, or just call their free quit line, 1-800-QUIT-NOW. Thank you again, Tobacco-Free Adagio Health, for your support.